I sat right back on that table there, and I was sitting around the dream team. All right, the dream team. Michael Jackson, Ed Gallagher, Nathan Daly. Now this was the dream team, give or take a few. Travis Harmon was there as well. But I sat around this table with this group of guys, and they began to have this discussion about biblical things. And maybe you've enjoyed lunch with these guys. Probably the best thing I've done while I was at Heritage is always sitting at lunch with some of those guys and hearing them talk about different biblical things. And as they would talk about things, I quickly realized that I knew very, very little about anything that I thought I knew something about. And they would ask me my opinion. And you know how you do those things when people ask you your opinion, you don't really know, but you feel uncomfortable answering truthfully. So they say, hey, what do you think about that? And my answer back is, I think that's great. And that sounds really good. I agree with you, you know. And that's kind of how I felt while I sat there and listened to these guys talk about all of these things. And here I was growing up in the church my entire life. I've been taught the Bible my entire life. I think that I know something. And immediately, while sitting around this group of guys, I'm humbled. I realize I don't know much at all. And I also felt at that moment very inadequate, unworthy. I felt like there was no place for me at the table. I felt like I needed to leave. And I heard the words, I don't remember who said these, but I heard the words of a speaker that had spoken not too long before that and said something along the lines of, if you ever think you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, I thought to myself, well, if I stay around here for any amount of time, I'll never have that problem. I'll always be in the right room. I'll never be the smartest guy when it comes to that. I guess my point is I felt just so unworthy to have a seat at the table. I didn't feel like I had anything to offer. And I've kind of shared with some of you before, maybe personally, individually, I've shared about all of my past mistakes and my past failures. And, you know, I was on the 6-year track in my undergraduate program. One of those tracks where you make a lot of mistakes, take a lot of the wrong classes, do poorly in some of those, and then finally you see that light at the end of the tunnel. You know, I did a lot of things that I probably should not have done and had to overcome those things. And now here I am sitting at this table, and all of a sudden all of those mistakes that I'd made, all of those shortcomings I had, all those failures were coming back up again. I was reliving this. I was refilling this. And here I was thinking, you know, you can criticize the shepherd leaving the 99 to go get the one until you are the one. And I felt like that quite often. Sometimes it's things that we do to ourselves that cause us to take that step back. Sometimes it's things that we do of our own doing that cause us to fall or to kind of squander that living, that heritage that we have. But sometimes it's things that other people do. I don't know how many of you know what I did before coming here, but in short, basically, I removed children from their homes when they were being abused and neglected. I worked for the Tennessee State Agency, a Child Protective Service, and I did all the intense, all the very severe cases. And I remember we had one case where a 10-year-old child was removed and placed in foster care. This child didn't deserve what had happened to him, but we got a call the next day after his first few nights in foster care, and they said, this young man won't eat at the table. He'll come in and he'll look at the food, he'll leave, and then later on we'll catch him with a plate eating in the closet. So what's going on? So we started looking into the past, and we found out that his stepfather, every time he'd get home from work and they would have dinner, would sit him down at the table and say, you can sit at the table, but if you do, you have to listen to all the things I'm going to say about you. Things like, I saw you today. I was walking to my truck and there was a dog and he was taking a poo on the side of the ground, and, well, it just reminded me of you. And he'd say a lot of other awful things to him. So he said, if you don't want to sit at the table and hear these things, you have to go to your room. But if I catch anything on the floor in your room, anything spilt, anything in this area, well, then you're really going to get it. And I'll spare you the details, but this happened. So this young man decided what he was going to do instead was head into the closet. Because the closet was dark and it wasn't carpeted in there, so if there was something dropped, he could clean it a lot easier. And he began to take care of himself and to hide away whenever he'd have a mess. He would go get his dinner and walk to his closet. He didn't feel worthy or appreciated at the table. He didn't feel like he could go to the table and have a seat. Now he's in this new home, but his way was still the same. He still didn't feel like he had a seat at the table. Sometimes it's things that we do to ourselves, but sometimes there are things that others do to us or that happen to us that are out of our control that cause us to make us feel unworthy, unappreciated, like we don't have a seat at the table. You know how I know Facebook tracks you? Because I was thinking about this lesson, and then this morning comes across the Facebook sphere this article about trauma. How does that happen? I read this article this morning, and it basically said that trauma is not your fault. It's not always your fault, anyways. But it is always your responsibility to overcome it. It's such a difficult, but a very true message. Sometimes the trauma, the hurt, the pain, the disability, the cripple, the sickness, the illness, sometimes the brokenness is not our fault. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. But it's always our responsibility to overcome it. This makes me think about a story in the Bible, in the book of 2 Samuel. In chapter 4, it talks about Jonathan, Saul's son, how he has a son. His son's name is Mephibosheth. Maybe you've heard of this guy before. Well, while Jonathan and his brothers and Saul are out at Mount Gilboa fighting the Philistines, and the Philistines are closing in, they kill Saul's son. Saul decides it's time for him to go as well. And all the way back at home, the nurse who's taking care of Mephibosheth, this 5-year-old boy, she hears about how the Philistines have come in and killed Saul and killed Jonathan. So she takes this 5-year-old boy and starts to run off with him. And in the process of running off and fleeing to wherever they were going, Mephibosheth is either dropped or falls somehow, and he becomes crippled. The trauma was not his fault, but the recovery was going to be his responsibility. You flip over a few chapters, and what you see is David ascends to the throne, and you get to chapter 9, and David is wanting to pay his respects or to be kind to one of the members of Saul's family. Now, many say that he didn't kill Mephibosheth because Mephibosheth was crippled, and so there was no concern about him taking over the country or taking over the nation. He couldn't fight for his own, and so maybe David just left him alone for this. But anyways, he allows Mephibosheth to come into his home. And if you look in 2 Samuel chapter 9, you see this interaction between this crippled boy and the king. In verse 6, chapter 9, it says, Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage to, and David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, Behold, I am your servant. David said to him, Do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father, and you shall eat at my table always. And he paid homage and said, What is your servant that you should show regard to a dead dog such as I? Of course, David then turns to the servant of Saul, this guy named Ziba. He says, Look, this man is descendant of Saul. I'm showing kindness to him. You're going to go back and be his servant. I'm giving him the land. I'm giving him all of the goods, the inheritance. You're going to treat him well. And above all of these things, Mephibosheth, you have a seat at the king's table. You're expected to be here. Mephibosheth's only response is, why would you do that for somebody who is such like a dead dog? I don't know what was going through his mind, but it seems like, anyways, that he didn't think very highly of himself. He didn't think that he was worthy. He had allowed this trauma to completely dictate and define his life. The mistakes, the things that had happened, whether it were his fault or not his fault, he had let them define who he was and how he was going to react. how he was going to respond to even the king's kindness. It gets worse for Mephibosheth for a little while anyways. You go a few chapters into the future here of 2 Samuel, and you see that David is up against the wall once again. Now Mephibosheth has already lost his grandfather, the king, and now he's been restored back to this position of being likened to the king's sons, having a seat at the table. But David's on the run from Absalom. And while David's on the run from Absalom, that same servant Ziba, who's supposed to be taking care and serving Mephibosheth, comes to David and says, hey, Mephibosheth's not here because he's going back to Jerusalem where Absalom is, and he's going to give his allegiance to him. And we find out later, it appears anyways, that Ziba had lied about Mephibosheth. Because you look later in these chapters here over into chapter 16, and what you find is this very interesting, not chapter 16, but 19, this very interesting view of Mephibosheth once David returns back to his rightful throne. In verse 24, it says, Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king. Here's what he thought about himself. Here's how he took care of himself over these years, this time. He had neither taken care of his feet, nor trimmed his beard, or washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came back in safety. You read through the rest of this here, David asked him, hey, why didn't you show up? Why didn't you come with me? Why didn't you come and be with me whenever I was on the run? And Mephibosheth says, well, this servant, the servant who you told to come help me, he betrayed me. I told him to go get a donkey so that I could ride to you, but I can't walk to you because my legs are crippled, and he never brought the donkey, and now he goes to you and says, I betrayed you. He betrayed you. He betrayed me. David says, enough of this drama. I'm going to give you half the land and Ziba half the land. And here's Mephibosheth's response. He was so thankful, so grateful, maybe still felt unworthy, that he says, I don't care about the land. I don't care about anything you're going to give me. I'm just happy you're safe. I just want a seat at the table. I think sometimes we are the Mephibosheth. Sometimes we are the unworthy, or at least that's the way we feel, the underappreciated, the ones who have made mistakes or traumas happen to us, or something has occurred in our lifetime where we sit at the table and we feel we have nothing to bring. We feel we have nothing to give, that we are completely unworthy and unfit to be in that position. There's that movie that came out the other year, The Greatest Showman. In The Greatest Showman, the song that kind of encapsulates the entire theme of the movie is the song This Is Me, and it's the bearded lady, the very rotund bearded lady who comes out and sings this song, This Is Me. And I don't know the lyrics off the top of my head, although if it catches on in my car, I might be singing pretty loudly. But she talks about when she was asked to sing that song, and how they were rehearsing it in the room. You can watch this on YouTube somewhere, how she was brought to tears, literally could not stand any longer as she's singing the song, because she said it represented her entire life, her actual life. She's not going to stay in the darkness anymore. She's not going to allow the scars. She's not going to allow the other things to hold her back. She's not going to allow what other people think of her or have tried to define her as to hold her back. But instead, she's going to embrace the glory of who she is. This is me. I'll never feel that I don't have a seat at the table. I'll never feel unworthy, because I know I always have something to offer. Some of us, I think, are Mephibosheth sometimes, but I've learned over the very short time in ministry that one of the greatest things that we can do as ministers to God's people is to help those Mephibosheths find their seat at the table. But we can't help them find their seat if we don't find our seat. And we have a king greater than David who has given us that seat. A king who has told us that we're worthy. At Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, I think it's the NIV that translates it and says, you are God's masterpiece. God doesn't make junk. He doesn't make trash. No matter what we try to say or think about ourselves, we always have something to bring, something to offer. And once we find our seat as ministers of the gospel, which is what you're here to train to do, which is what I'm here to train to do, is to help all of those who think they have no talent, they have no worth, they have nothing to give and nothing to add, they feel unappreciated and unworthy. We help them to find their value, to identify their talent. We help them to find their seat at the table. It's funny that we're kind of in the cafeteria now, because I remember growing up in the high school cafeteria, I hated it because you always had to choose your seat wisely, and sometimes there might look like there's an open seat, but really it's not. Somebody's being ugly about it. I remember those who would take me in, kind of as that wounded bird. Say, hey, come take your seat here. You're welcome with us. Isn't that what Jesus Christ has done? We all come broken. We all come wounded. We all come messed up. We all come depressed and anxious. We all come broken. But there's nothing that He cannot overcome. He made the lame walk, the blind to see, the deaf to hear. He made those who appeared crazy to be sane. He made the bleeding stop. He made the storm calm. He stayed awake when everyone else fell asleep. He multiplied the bread and the fish. He conquered death. He rebuilt the temple. He showed the holes. There's nothing He has not done. There's nothing He cannot do. Although we come broken, He will heal us. It's our responsibility as followers of Christ to find our seat at the table and to show others where their seat is too.
Amen.